like to move on to the next presenter, please, and to give our thoughts today from Africa Development Bank. We have Dr. Ousmane Doré.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the African Development Bank. I was called to present a major study we did in Nigeria on the Infrastructure Action Plan. Actually, there is no need to recall that looking at the country with all its potential that we've been talking about here, that a critical challenge facing the country is infrastructure. So the bank was approached by the government to undertake a major study which would lay out a master plan for basically addressing this infrastructure deficit. What I'm going to talk about is, I believe I should put the, okay. So here is the outline. I will give an idea about the burden of poor infrastructure in Nigeria. I give you some key findings that emerged from the study I've been referring to. I believe this study has been circulated. At least we gave to home strength to get it circulated. Then we asked the question, because this is a program worth for 350 billion over the next 10 years. So the figure look alarming, but I'm going to mention to you that following our study, the government-owned study by the National Planning Commission established that for over 30 years period, in their National Integrated Master Plan, Nigeria would need $2.9 trillion to close the infrastructure gap. So by all means, this is far off from the large figure I'm quoting here. The question would be, can it be financed? I'm going to say something about that because we are in a forum where I believe some people would be making commitment as to what to do about Nigeria infrastructure. And then what is required for effective implementation of such program. I'll say something about maintenance and then the economic impact of the program. Now, the reason why I was telling my friend that my presentation may be longer because everyone is talking about what they're doing in Nigeria. So it's only natural for the African Development Bank that has been in the country for the past 40 years to say something about our portfolio. So I will add some 3 to 4 slides about what we are presently doing in Nigeria, a portfolio of about $2.5 billion, both in private and public sector in the country. And then obviously I would outline an agenda for early action. Let's say something about the burden of infrastructure. It is clear that there's a broad agreement, both within government, outside government, private sector, and the major problem for the country standing on its way for realizing its Vision 2020 is infrastructure deficit. I won't give figure. But what we did in this study, we started out by benchmarking Nigeria. Clearly, you cannot say, okay, what's the road network in Nigeria relative to Ghana or Burkina Faso or elsewhere? What we did, we took one major high-income country, Japan, some high middle-income country, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, and then we have low middle-income like Indonesia, South Africa, and then we basically had a low-income country, Bangladesh. Now, the particularity of this country is that they have population, except for South Africa, between 115 and 200 million. So which is roughly the size of Nigeria. And what you can see from this indicator, I won't go through all of them. Let's look at the road density, for instance, the first column. Clearly, Nigeria fared relatively well, but compared to a country like Russia that have a huge land mass, this ratio is really has land mass as a denominator. But let's look at the consumption, power consumption. I mean, there's no need to insist on this. Look at even compared to Bangladesh, Nigeria fared relatively worse here, and in terms of power consumption, suggesting that this is a critical problem for the country to realize its vision. And then you can look at access to water, sanitation. Many indicators in that study would simply show Nigeria at the bottom end of this comparison. So what we see, what were the key elements of the study? I give the result, and then we discuss a little bit about how did we arrive at this. the way we first did this study was to look at the major sector of the economy. We took transport, energy, ICT, water and sanitation. And we set the target for each of these sectors. For instance, if you take the road or the energy, what sort of target we are shooting for? So we went to the Vision 2020 document. The government is stating there that they want to achieve 40,000 megawatts. So that would be a target that we set for that sector. For other sectors where there's no clear definition of target in the report, we work with the government agency in setting up these targets. So all in all, we were able to see what Nigeria needs to do to deliver, to come to this target and realize the Vision 2020. And one of the key outcomes of the work is that with the full implementation of the IAP, Nigeria investment in infrastructure would peak at 12% of GDP, which is today at about less than 5%. So you can imagine already how much investment would be coming forth. It will peak at 12% by 2016 and then decline to about 10%. The reason being that most of the reform is going to be basically front-loaded. If you look at the power sector reform, we know most of the investment will take place in the next 5 to 10 years. All right. So total fixed investment in the economy also would rise to 22% of GDP. That's, well, from 22 to 32% of GDP by 2015. That's a major increase in total fixed investment in the economy. And then we found also that the growth of non-oil GDP would rise to about 10% a year in real terms during the period 2015-2020. All right, so here is the cost of the full implementation of the program. It's a 350 billion in constant 2010 prices, so which means, you know, we are accounting for inflation and price development, and for the 10 years period. Again, this, if you compare to the 30 years master plan of the National Planning Commission, is really a relatively low figure. Here is where we found the major allocation of these 350 billion. We have soft infrastructure, which means capacity building, technical study for about 15 billion. Then we have hardcore infrastructure, which are essentially rehabilitation of existing network of road and power asset, plus any construction of new facility. And then you have the transport fleet. All of them together account for about 335 billion. So that's the total of the investment there. Now, what are the sectors? Clearly, this has been pointed out here by the presentation from the Honorable Governor on both states, that transport and power remain essentially the main challenge, essentially. In fact, there is a survey done of businessmen in Nigeria showing clearly the major obstacle to their doing business in Nigeria happen to be power, then transport, and then a bunch of other factors that they pointed out to. So then you have water, irrigation, and that also account for a substantial portion of these investments, and ICT communication for 15 billion. So I'm going to skip this slide because I will come back to it at the end of this first part. That size of the investment we're talking about, 350 billion. Can you imagine that we can find easily such an amount when in fact the PIDA, the Program of Infrastructure Development in Africa that the African Development Bank is mandated to implement, doesn't come close to that figure. But the PIDA is a selected list of projects that the African Union found very critical to deliver as a quick win. So it cannot be compared to what we are doing here, where we're putting all the major infrastructure together and then giving a magnitude of how to tackle them. So here is what we think can be done on the financing side. Well, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is set up to basically collect any excess of revenue from what is set in the budget has been calculated. We did some calculation based on the price of oil remaining above $100 per barrel. So clearly, these are strong assumptions. As we all know, this is a medium to long run study, and oil price for anything may not stay in that higher bar. So, but the calculation also assumes that if we were to put all the excess oil revenue into the sovereign wealth fund, and then taking 25% of it for the infrastructure component, as you know, the sovereign wealth fund has two other components, the future generation account and the stabilization fund. But in the infrastructure fund, you can put 25% only. This is what we think can be used to finance partly this program. Government funding would come essentially from partly the budget for 28%, and funding by state agency, either through the return earning or through providing guarantee to the state agency to borrow. And then you have domestic and offshore debt from the government sector. Then I see the donor and go to the household. Household in this framework, you can believe that all of this will be done mainly through PPP. So essentially there is a role for the consumer to pay for power consumption, for using water, and all those would be claiming for 8.7 billion. The private sector is taking the bulk of this investment, 130 billion, essentially through equity and debt. And we can spend a lot of time debating this, because what's happened is in the Nigeria domestic market today, there's really no major instrument for long-term financing. So the idea is that in the action I will be spelling out after this slide, it is recommended that there is a major action taken to channel the domestic financing into infrastructure development. You have pension fund in Nigeria sitting on some 20 billion assets. You have insurance companies. So we believe that a lot can be done if only Nigeria can match what is being done in South Africa and other emerging markets, mobilizing 35% of the domestic saving into infrastructure development. That can generate that much. All right, so the issue of maintenance I'm just mentioning briefly, because it's all known that maintenance is key in keeping the infrastructure asset. Now, all the figure I'm giving include the maintenance. And the reality I'm highlighting here is that in Nigeria today, we believe that maintenance cost spending is really in the range of 500 million. And when in fact, according to our study, to have an adequate maintenance of existing infrastructure asset, you need something around $2.6 to $4.3 billion a year. What's the economic impact? I won't bother you with this, because we had a couple of scenarios. The first scenario, which you can call the baseline scenario, is assuming that growth would be in the range of 7 to 8% over the next decade, and driven essentially by the non-oil sector, which should be growing at about 10% a year. And then you have other scenario in case we cannot mobilize that much money to fully implement the program. So you have a partial implementation of the program, and the paper gave you figure on all those. But here is the conclusion of these things. Remember where we started out from. We started out by looking at the Vision 2020 of the country, meaning that they want by 2020 to be among the top 20 economy in the world. So the GDP has to be around 900 billion. So if you look at today, and this figure, by the way, is not Nigeria current GDP, this is the Nigerian adjusted GDP after the rebasing exercise and ongoing. So we have a mission in Abuja next week to validate the GDP rebasing exercise. If we do that, we think that GDP will be about 450 billion, which would make Nigeria the largest economy in in Africa. So clearly, if you take that as the base, 450 billion, you plug in all the assumptions, what we find is that Vision 2020 cannot be realized in 2020. So you may have to call Vision 2022, because that's when the GDP reached the 900 billion mark. But yet, our calculations show that the country can essentially reach the income per capita by 2020, the income per capita of 4,000. So it's really an interesting conclusion, because by the government own account, we are 6 years down from the 2020. The likelihood that we may reach there is less. All right, so folks, this is just some slides that can come back. I see I'm already in yellow. Here are some action that needed to be taken to really put in place or implement this program. First is that there need to be an implementation arrangement whereby the development of a detailed program for capacity building and launching of technical study must be undertaken. There must be a way of introducing technical and environmental study standard for all infrastructure sector consistent with ISO 9000 standard. Upgrade and expand the skill development program to include accreditation. Now, this is very important because remember, a country like Philippines did this kind of major infrastructure action plan in the 80s or 90s. What's happened is that the offshore company that were there to implement this program were forced to bring technicians from Japan and other parts of the world. It created a major problem. The reason being that they didn't have, they had skill development, but they didn't have the right accreditation. Thereby, the insurance company were really asking for much. There are some financing arrangements. Let me conclude by saying that following this study, we are going to be launching in Abuja in coming months, this year anyway, a major investor conference to try to seek investors to get involved in mobilizing this financing to develop Nigeria Infrastructure Action Plan. I believe I stopped there because the second slide, the fourth additional slide I was talking about has to do with ADB, current portfolio in Nigeria, which according to this table, I mean, we have a strategy which I will not discuss here. But look at the public sector portfolio today. We are in agriculture, infrastructure, multi-sector activity, social sector, environment, for $1.3 billion. I can give comment on that. Here is our portfolio on the private sector side. So many projects, mainly line of credit to financial institutions, to the tune of $1.2 billion. And in the new bank operation, we have in agriculture, the agricultural transformation agenda, and the rural, the urban water reform and port harcourt supply sanitation project for $200 million, Mr. Governor. I have to give you that good news here that we are going to the board before the end of this month for this project.
Very good, very good, very good. Doctor, thank you very much. You've gone from crimson red to blood red on this monitor here now, but thank you very much for that presentation. Most enlightening. We have to stop there just due to time. But could you please show your appreciation for the presentation from Doctor? And I've actually been managing to hide my stop clock here from Hakeem to my right because you managed to go for 16 minutes before you got the red light. So I don't know how you managed to engineer that with the organizers, but congratulations. I have one very quick question for you before I open it to the floor. And this is just in respect to, in fact, we have one question here from the floor. Why don't we take this one first? Just second row here, please.
A special thank you to you and your team, and especially to TAS for all the great jobs the African development is doing in Africa. You keep mentioning about 2020 vision, and I can tell you I have that 2020 vision here with me. My question is very simple. I've been in the construction for over 15 years. I've done quite a lot of great projects in the UK here. Looking at what the African development is doing, what are your roles or how are you advising governments in Africa in reference to, from the design stage to finishing a key project in Africa? It's taking over 6 years, and there are quite a lot of innovations that can help make things easier, faster, save costs, and bring homes to millions of people in Africa. Thank you, sir.
Well, should I? Okay.
Yes.
It's a very good question. Look, we are a development bank. We do due diligence on project. First of all, we get involved at the conception stage. The way projects work with ADB, we first identify. It can come from the government side. The case of River Project, we were informed of the need for greater Port Harcourt development. So we send preparation mission and assess the viability of the project. First, the financial viability. Second, the development outcome. Because we are a development bank, the project must be able to have an impact on the life of people. Now, in the process of doing all those due diligence, including the procurement role of the bank, and so to ensure that the money, once it's disbursed, it goes exactly for what it is intended for, it takes time. You cannot sometimes cut down the timeline. But what I can tell you is for you to go to the website and compare the life cycle of a project at the ADB compared to the World Bank. We are doing much better. The reason is that we understand the African reality much better. We, as the African Development Bank, has been in various sectors of the economy. Today, we are mainly in infrastructure, so we have built expertise, and we have pushed decentralization, very key. My office located in Abuja, we are in a position to go and see what is going on. We don't need to rely on Tunis or Abidjan. That cut down the time for processing documentation.
Okay. Thank you. Another question here. This will need to be the last question, so perhaps we'll take someone we've not had a question from before yet. Just here in the front row, please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jesse Ofida. My question is, the development paradigm you are using is likely to be adapted from the existing one, the Western one. Are you addressing the issue of African special position to drag the women folk? Because if you are leading with the current development paradigm, you will be thinking, you will just be seeing more men.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the women group, who are always at the bottom, will be ignored. And after some years, they are almost cut off. Okay. How are you making sure you are
So how is Africa Development Bank empowering women?
Yes, very good question. In fact, we have a gender strategy at the bank. And we were going to use the centenary months to really launch that strategy in Nigeria. Here is what we do. First, in terms of empowerment with our project, any project must be able to highlight how much impact this is making on gender. You can get your project rejected during the review process simply because you have not made the case that it is gender, it has a gender impact. So that's one. The second thing is that we are an institution that has been supporting microfinance institutions, which really cater to the need of the lower end. We also cater to the small and medium size through lending to the policy bank like the BOI, Nexim. They have huge credit from the bank, line of credit, for on lending to SMEs that presumably employ youth and women. So clearly, it's a part of an overall strategy. We believe that some of the projects we are doing clearly are pro-poor, in the sense that they probably help women to be lifted out of their low-income predicament. So yes, gender is a key component of the bank project in Nigeria and broadly in Africa.
Dr. Dr. Doré, thank you very much. And the work you're doing with the Africa Development Bank, I think, is an extraordinary achievement, and we hope that that continues. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could show your appreciation. Thank you.